Today, Bernard would be 108 years old. So he was born May 25th, 1916 in Bethel Township, which is in McDonough County, in the area known as Gin Ridge. He was born to Grover and Elizabeth Pruitt Thompson. He was the third oldest in a family of 8. He attended the Macomb schools and later helped his father on the farm. He was drafted into the Army on April 16, 1941 at the age of 25. He was assigned to Company G, 18th Regiment, 1st Division Infantry at Camp Grant. He held the rank of corporal. Now, he spent a little over 2 years stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina in the headquarters detachment, and he received orders to go overseas and then went to Baltimore first. Well, as luck would have it, there's a lot of boys in that family. 2 of his brothers were also in Baltimore. Kenneth and Richard were both there, and at the time, Richard owed him $20. So on the day he was set to ship out, Bernard broke rank, and he went to the post office to check just one more time, and the $20 was there. He said it was the best day ever. So on March 5th, 1943, he left for the European theater operation in France. He arrived on March 10th and then continued on to Oran, Africa. Eventually, he arrived in Sicily, and he was assigned as assistant squad leader in Squad 745. The island of Sicily was invaded on July 9th, 1943, and the invasion portion concluded August 17th of 1943. It was known as the Battle of Sicily or Operation Husky. On August 1st, he was wounded in the shoulder in a Sicilian battle at the base of Mount Etna, and he was taken prisoner along with 3 others by the Germans. And later then he was reported missing. But eventually the Red Cross reported to his family that he had been captured by the Germans. So the captured soldiers were either forced to march or put in train cars back to Germany. And he can recall marching 4 to 5 days at a time, or being on a train for 3 to 4 days at least 2 different times. In his 2 years, 2 months, and 15 days of being held prisoner by the Germans, he was moved to 3 different prison camps. He started off at Stalag 7B in Bavaria, which is northwest of Munich. But he was only there a few days, and they moved him to Stalag 2B, which was near Prussia. Eventually, he was put on a train car and moved to Stalag 3B, Fürstenberg, Germany, which is about 60 miles southeast of Berlin. Now, while he was in captivity, which he didn't like to talk about very much, but occasionally he would say this or that, he did talk about the food was scarce. They ate a lot of rotten potatoes, bread, and cheese. There was a lot of sawdust put in as filler in the foods to make them, feel fuller. And while the Red Cross did provide packages, it wasn't very often. And well, the Germans kind of took the packages. They were hungry too, so they didn't get to see the Red Cross packages all that often. One story that I can definitely remember him telling more than once, there was a dead horse out there, and they took a vote, basically, do we eat it or we don't eat it? And they decided, well, we'll either die from eating the horse or we'll die from starvation. And they ate the horse. Another story I can remember, he talked about the Germans thought it would be funny to send a German Shepherd into the Russian barracks. Well, the joke apparently was on the Germans because the Russians had that dog skinned and in a pot before anybody knew what hit them. But I was talking to Mom, or listening to Mom talk just a few minutes ago, and she also remembers him saying he drew the line at that one. So apparently German Shepherd was never on his menu. So he also ate blood pudding, and he always would say he thought that the rice over there had legs. Yeah, sure, yeah. He did escape several times while he was prisoner. One time he was in a minefield during an escaped attempt, and another time an Italian family hid him in a cellar, and they also fed him bread and potatoes. We'll come back to that German family at the end. Bernard said he could run faster on his hands and feet, especially when the Germans were shooting at him. But on his final escape attempt, and it was his final attempt because it was successful, Bernard and 6 others were actually captured by the American soldiers at the Elbe River, and that's near Berlin. Well, they quickly figured out that he was an American soldier and he was released from the captivity. And then he was back in control of the Americans, so they set off for France. It was a long journey to France. Well, he finally, on May 8th of 1945, he was put aboard a Liberty ship bound for the U.S., and he was in very poor health. He weighed about 100 pounds, had a lot of trouble in his legs and feet, which they attributed to, poor nutrition and a lot of cold winter marching and that type of thing. And as luck would have it, when he got on that Liberty ship, guess who was there? There was Uncle Richard, back on that ship. Good thing he paid him the $20, I guess. So this is an excerpt from a letter from Uncle Richard. So these are in Uncle Richard's words. Coming home on the ship from overseas before being discharged, I was on the upper deck watching the loading of the POWs. I told my buddy, that's my brother who had been a POW being carried on that stretcher. My buddy tried to change my mind, but during the night I looked for and found my brother that I had not seen for over 2 years. I took my watch off of my arm and put it on his arm. After spending a few illegal minutes, we separated again. Well, Bernard made it back to the States May 19th, 1945. He was able to come home for a short visit before going back to Florida. And then in August of 1945, while he was on a train back to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, the Japanese surrendered. Bernard was discharged August 14th, 1945, and the Japanese signed the official instrument of surrender on September 2nd of 1945, and the war was over. At the time of his honorable discharge, he was promoted to the rank of sergeant, and his classification was changed to POW. Now, none of this really mattered to him, but it matters a lot to me and my mom. He was awarded the Good Conduct Medal, the Purple Heart Medal, the European, African, Middle Eastern Ribbon with 1 Bronze Battle Star, 4 Overseas Service Bars, 1 Service Stripe, and in 1989 he received the Prisoner of War Medal. And I remember Mom making him apply for it. He had no use for it whatsoever. He didn't need it, and she said, too bad, you're going to get it. Let's fill out this paperwork. He was a lifetime member of the Macomb VFW Post 1921 and a member of the Bladensville American Legion Post 424 for 56 years. So after leaving the Army and entering civilian life, he came to Bladensville. He had a son who died in infancy, a daughter, Sherry, and a granddaughter, Stephanie. He worked at Great Service, the Illinois Department of the Highway, and later the Illinois Department of Agriculture until he retired in 1982. And after that, everybody knows you could find him at the golf course. He was well known, he was well liked in the community. He had a special way of waving at you, if you remember that. He had many friends, but he rarely talked about his time in the service and being a POW. But when he did talk about it and told stories, it was really fascinating and hard to believe what he went through and what the others went through as well. And so one kind of last note back to the Italian family that hid him on one of his escapes. She had a noodle maker, and that made an impression on him. And he made the best noodles because he was a great cook. And so they looked high and low for this noodle maker. It wasn't like it is now where you can just go on Amazon and get everything. They looked high and low, found a noodle maker, and it even had the instructions still in Italian. But this lady had used it there, and so he made great chicken gizzards, but I'm not really into that. I'm into the noodles. So we always would ask him what the secret to any of his great dishes were, and he'd say, well, I drop it on the floor several times. Okay, don't ask, just eat. Okay. He was also known to carry a piece of candy or a candy bar in his pocket or to have a sandwich in his car. And when you would ask him why, he said, because I don't want to be hungry again. So that was my grandpa. And I also remember he would take a sweet Jell-O and he would add a bag of sugar to it. That was some mighty fine Jell-O. So thank you, and thank you.